put your attendance on the roll.
All right, you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. How long did you all stop hearing me?
2 minutes.
About 2 minutes?
Yeah.
All right. Hold on. Okay, so we'll continue. Wait, hold on now.
When you reach this slide, so
Right.
you can say, yeah, when you reach this slide, we stop hearing you.
This one right here?
Yeah.
Okay, that's when I was supposed to stop. I think, hold on, I think we're getting some technical difficulties on the second speaker. Just now.
Please feel free to send in your questions to the person that says ask questions anonymously. So it will be answered later by our panelists.
Okay, hold on. Brittany's mic seems to be it's not working apparently. It's a technical error. I don't know what it is. All right, hold on. All right, Anne-Marie, you want to continue?
Sure.
Okay. Hold on.
Good night, everyone. My name is Anne-Marie Minghon, and I'll just be continuing a story of the background of Project Hope. So the beginning of Project Hope depended on one integral factor. It was approximately 2.5 years ago. I received a message from one of my colleagues, Abigail Ramdas, requesting a meeting. The potential nature of this meeting was far from my mind as I politely accepted, thinking lightly of it. The next day went on per usual, and as our last class came to a close, I began to pack up my things. I remember Abigail turning to look for me in my usual spot, at the very back of the amphitheater. And as she stood before me and began to explain why she asked to speak to me, I soon realized that the topic was not something that I could think lightly of. There she was asking me to be on the executive. But I had this feeling of being undeserving of even being considered for a position. And this feeling was so overwhelming that I almost refused. Almost. It just so happened that I was going through so much in my life at the time that I felt that I had nothing left in me to keep fighting. I had already decided before being asked by Abigail to be on the executive that I just wanted to finish my first year of studies. I had gone through so much that year alone. I opted to have my final memory as a minor accomplishment of completing my first year, and then I would never be seen again. I was tired of being in pain, tired of suffering. But God had another plan for me, a true blessing, and without which I may not have even been alive today. And so the day came, as God had it in his plan all along, that I was to be the International Service Director. Shortly after, I remember sitting in front of the library when Abigail approached me. I cannot recall the exact conversation, but I will never forget when she told me that the two topics we were focusing on for our tenure were autism and suicide awareness. Suicide awareness. Before she finished those two words, I could almost feel my heart stop. And I thought to myself, wow, good one, God, what are you trying to do to me here? What are you trying to tell me? Soon after, I met Brittany Davis, and so began a journey that would forever change my life. And one of the most pivotal moments of this journey occurred exactly 2 years ago, on this very same day, September the 10th, 2018, World Suicide Prevention Day. Brittany, Abigail, and myself were about to close our Suicide Survivor Stories initiative that was held that week with the final video. We had planned carefully so that as soon as class finished, an announcement would be made and that we could reach out to as many persons as possible. We had just finished a professionalism and ethics class, and the next 10 minutes would change my life forever. As the video began to play, I could feel my breath escape me. The world around me seemed to stop. There was my story on the screen being told in front of everyone. All of my vulnerabilities lay bare, exposed. But there were only two people in that room who knew that it was my story, Brittany and Abigail. I was not ready for anyone else to know who that story belonged to. I sat there among all my classmates with none of them aware that that story was mine, And the person who went through all those things, was going through all those things, was right beside them all along. I made it through that day and life seemed to go on as normal. That was until the day came when I was to stand in front of an audience and publicly reveal my story. Our very first Project Hope event, January the 31st, 2019. The event started and progressed, but not without difficulty, however. It was pursued with unyielding perseverance. But as the minutes passed by, I could slowly feel myself slipping away until the time closed in on me. I couldn't breathe. I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, but again, God knew I needed someone. And it was at this very moment my close friend arrived and came straight to me and prayed with me. I somehow made it up to that microphone, and as I stood there mortified, I could not feel my feet. I was shaking. My vision blurred and my voice almost failed me. But as I felt Abigail and Brittany on either side of me, I found the strength and began my story. Fast forward to an amazing tenure with incredible people who I'm so privileged and honored to call my friends, and 2.5 years later.
All right, that's it. So that was our story to let you all know how everything would have happened. It was truly something that was very special. It took a lot of effort. It was a lot of work, and we are just really happy to see that it's now 2 years since that this has continued to happen. And we really want to thank everyone for the support that we've gotten so far. And we pray that it will continue to be a success and continue to reach out to the people, to those who need this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this time, I would like to introduce Amelia to do the moment of silence.
Good night, everyone. We're here tonight because we feel the importance of suicide awareness through the experiences of ourselves, our friends, or family members. At this point, we ask that you all observe this moment of silence to remember the precious lives lost and reflect on how we can help others. Thank you.
Thank you, Amelia. Now I welcome Dr. Chen Young Ki to discuss the importance of suicide awareness and statistical data in relation to depression and suicide.
Thank you, Avanel. Good night, everybody. Really pleased that we're having this initiative again, because I think the more that we talk about mental health and specifically suicide is the more we understand it. I'm one of the counselors at the service at the UE St. Augustine Counseling Service, and I just wanted to give you an idea about the prevalence of these issues on campus. So, for example, we always track the kinds of issues that people come to seek services for, and two of the main issues would be, one, interpersonal issues, so whether it's difficulty with pair relationships, feeling lonely, feeling bullied, sometimes it's about an abusive, intimate relationship. It could be any of those sorts of things. And the second major issue is actually clinically significant depression and anxiety, or a bit of both. And so I think one takeaway because of the correlation there, is the importance of maintaining healthy social relationships on our mental health. And I think that in a time of COVID, when we're all trying to physically distance for safety, a lot of us are actually feeling lonelier and having less support. Maybe we would, usually see our friends on campus or in class or at work, and we're not having that contact anymore. And worse, some of us are stuck in some very difficult home situations. Another piece of information really coming out of the counseling service is that we systematically screen for depression. So everybody seeking the services fills out a little screener, and typically, consistently, we get about 65 to 75% of our students actually indicating moderately to severely depressed mood. And crazily, that's not even what they're coming to the counseling service for a lot of the time. And I think the point I want to make is that a lot of us are actually experiencing difficulty and not even recognizing it as depression. Maybe we just think life is hard and nobody cares and good things don't happen to me. Maybe I don't deserve them. So I learned to expect very little. And then when bad things happen, it's kind of like, well, what do you expect? And actually not realizing that there may be something that's the matter, that actually there's a lot of support available for, When we think about suicide in particular, I think another initiative at the counseling service there, about 2 years ago, we started walk-ins. And that's when students who don't have appointments can come in and at least have a short consultation with the counselor. And what we discovered then was that 1 in 3 of our students was presenting with suicidal thoughts or feelings. And so the amount of suicidal risk assessments that we did doubled. So I think for me, it reinforced that the more you ask questions is the more you discover what's under the surface. And of the students who were currently having suicidal thoughts and feelings, 1 in 5 of them actually posed a moderate to severe risk to themselves. Now, there's 2 ways of looking at that. You can say that the majority of people who have suicidal thoughts maybe are thinking about it as escape. They're overwhelmed by what's happening in their life. They don't necessarily want to be dead. But on the other hand, over 20% of people actually are thinking about ending their life. And these are people that we really want to be able to reach out and support, So I think it's really important to keep the conversation going and understand a little bit more. And I think I would really like to invite everyone, while you're brushing your teeth later tonight, to think about what you might do differently to help raise awareness, whether it is you want to initiate a conversation with a friend, maybe you want to reach out to a friend that you may be worried about who may be struggling to talk. Don't take a little WhatsApp, I'm fine, as the end of the conversation necessarily, if your gut instinct tells you more is happening. Even if you just want to quietly get online and find a website that helps you understand a little bit more about how you would support and what to look for. In other words, kind of arm yourself with some information to help you support others, so that maybe one less person out there feels like it's only happening to them and that nobody would understand or care. So yes, that's the challenge for us. It's really prevalent. Suicide is not about mental illness. Suicide is about feeling overwhelmed by life. And it's not always about wanting to be dead. Sometimes it's about fantasizing about escape. And I think the more we understand that, the more we help each other talk about it, the better. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Chinyanki. And I hope that everybody will do this challenge tonight. Now I invite Dr. Khadija Khan, a psychologist, to educate us on methods of coping strategies students can use to cope during this time, and how we can help others during this time, and signs to look out for.
Okay, thank you, Avanel, and good night, everyone. So Avanel, while I just do a little introduction, can I ask you to kindly pass host privileges on to me to enable me to share screen? Because I do have a presentation that I wanted to share.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, thank you. So good night again, everyone. So I am Dr. Khadija Khan. I'm a lecturer in clinical psychology in the Faculty of Medical Sciences. And I also do research in suicide and suicide prevention, and I'm a clinician as well. So it is a pleasure for me to be here with you tonight, especially on this day where we're placing some of the focus on suicide prevention. It's such an important topic, and it's really good to see that the Rotaract Club, it was really heartening to hear more about your Project Hope. And it really does fill me with a lot of hope for both UWE and for young people and our society in general. So thank you very much. Avanel, so I'm signed in on 2 devices. So can I ask you to transfer host to the other Khadija Khan who's signed in?
No problem.
Great. Thank you.
Actually, Dr. Khan, the current device that you're on is host, so you can pass privileges on to the other one.
Oh, I'm the host. That's right. Thank you for that. Okay.
So just go in participant, and you'll be able to search for the other one, and you'll see more.
And I can make myself host.
Yeah.
Yes. That's right, because you usually have to give up host privileges. All right. And of course, Murphy's Law, it's not going to work for me right now. So all it's allowing me to do is rename.
Okay, could you give me back host?
I'm trying. I want to give somebody host, just not this device. So let me figure that out again. Okay, so you wanna troubleshoot with me? Talk me through it, because I'm right-clicking on my ID, but it's not giving me any options.
Okay,
so what should I do?
When you hover over your ID,
yes,
you should see, go to the right of your name. You should see options for mute and more. Come up in blue. Right, hit more.
Yeah, so that's not coming up. It's only
Okay.
Okay, so here's what I'm gonna do. I think if I leave on one account, it's going to ask me to transfer host privileges. Yes?
Okay.
And then I can pass them to you. Good.
No problem.
Okay, so it's going to go back to Rotaract Club Mt.Hope.
It should.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to select, yes?
Yeah. Okay.
I would just like to inform everyone, don't forget to send in your questions to ask questions here. So it will be answered in the end. And don't forget to follow. Oh, okay.
Thank you, Avanel. Good filling in there. So we're back, and I think we're in business. So thank you. Was that your treasurer? I missed.
It's Johannes.
Johannes. Well done, Johannes. We're in business. Okay, so allow me to share screen with you. Okay, so I wanted to talk with you today a little bit about suicide awareness and prevention. And as we talk about the prevention, we're going to talk about ways that we can cope and also protect against this risk of suicide. And especially in this context, I'm going to frame it in this age of COVID-19 that we're in. So you'll see an icon at the top, a logo at the top, the COVID-19 task force. So early on in the pandemic, in February, March of this year, the regional UE appointed a COVID-19 task force, and I'm a member of that task force. And part of our role is to do outreach and is to capacity build. So again, I'm really pleased to be here to share with you tonight. So I know it's a little bit late in the evening. We've had long days, so you're probably fighting off a little fatigue. So I thought I would get our brains and cognitive energy going with a little quiz. And for this, I'm going to ask you to put your responses in the chat. So it's going to be very simple, multiple choice. So here's the first one. Worldwide, how many people do you estimate die from suicide every year? So I'm going to pause my video so I'll be able to check into the chat to see how people are responding. So I can just switch to the chat. So let's see your answers. What do you think the answer is? So pick one of those. Let's get a few answers in. Okay, so I see a variety of answers. Let's see what the correct response is. So we're looking at worldwide, what you think the size of the problem is. Okay, so here's the answer coming. And it's actually 800,000. So those of you who selected D or 800,000, yes. So it is a massive problem. It affects many people all around the world, okay? Here's another question for you. So this one you have to pick 3 countries. So pick 3 countries or 3 letters. Which of the following countries have the highest suicide rate in the Caribbean? Which ones do you think? Out of those options, pick 3. So I see a guess for Jamaica, Suriname. I see Guyana, Trinidad, Jamaica, Suriname, Guyana, Trinidad, Haiti is there, Trinidad, another one for Jamaica, etc. So some really good guesses there. Some more guesses are coming in. I see EBA, that's Trinidad, Suriname, Jamaica, another for Haiti. Okay, so let's see what the answer is and let's see if you're correct. So guess what? So I think a couple of people got this. It is Suriname, Guyana, and Trinidad. And in order, it's Guyana first, Suriname second, and Trinidad has the 3rd highest rate in the Caribbean. Now, Haiti is also one of those countries that are in the top 5 in the region. Now, interestingly enough, a lot of people chose Jamaica. And while Jamaica may have higher rates of other kinds of social problems like homicide, it actually has one of the lowest suicide rates in the world, not just the Caribbean. So how about that? So Barbados also has one of the lowest rates in the world. So what we see then is that the rates across the Caribbean vary quite widely. So suicide is not necessarily a Caribbean problem, but it affects some countries worse than others. Okay, here's another one. So this one now is hitting on some actually very recent statistics. So approximately how many persons do you estimate die by suicide in Trinidad and Tobago every month? And I'm basing these on 2020 statistics. So I see lots of guesses for 5. I see a D, I see a 15. More 5s, I see a 9, a 15, a D. Okay. So I think a couple people have this one right. So the actual answer is actually 9, closer to 9. And so far, the numbers show that from January to August, we've had 74 deaths. So in those 8 months, that works out to approximately 9 deaths per month. Okay. And how about this one? Yes, JC, I see you reacting to that figure. So it's a little bit higher than people were estimating. Okay, so for this one, so far, unanimously, the room is saying it's men. Let's see if anybody disagrees with that. No, so far it's all men. And you know what? You're correct. And so we are going to touch a tiny bit on gender differences in suicide. What about this one? What is suicide? Is it inevitable? preventable, unavoidable, or destined? What do you think? Okay, so far unanimously the B's have it. And I think we're all on the same page with that. So what we do know is it is a problem for us, but guess what? It's preventable. Okay, so thank you for taking part in that little quiz. There's going to be another one at the end, so save some of that energy and enthusiasm there. So let's touch a little bit on what is suicide. So it comes from the Latin word, and as you can see, the word in itself talks about the killing of oneself. And suicidal behaviors can involve a number of things. So it can involve your thoughts, having suicidal thoughts. It can involve attempts at suicide, and it can also involve the actual completions. So why is this important? This actually becomes more important for monitoring and surveillance. If we want to get an idea of the size and shape of the problem we have, we need to consider all of these. But guess what? Some of these are harder to measure than others. So in terms of completions, people who die by suicide, we may get more figures for that. But for somebody who's having thoughts, or for somebody who attempts, but the attempt, they may not end up in a hospital, then that tells us there is a lot more to this problem that we may never be aware of. So we just have to estimate as best as we can. So I told you that Trinidad was third highest in the Caribbean. But with respect to the world rankings, and these were some of the more recent rankings I could find, these are 2017 rankings, we see Trinidad around position 40 in the world. So we see Guyana in second place, Suriname in sixth place. And remember I told you that countries like Jamaica, Grenada, Barbados, Antigua are at the bottom of the list in the world. So out of 183 countries, look at where we are ranked. So Trinidad and Tobago is ranked 40th, and other Caribbean countries are ranked highly, but some Caribbean countries are at the bottom of that list. Okay. When we look at gender, look at this. They've collected data for decades. So we're looking at, roughly 50 years of data. And what we see is that disparity by gender has persisted. And there are reasons for this. So men usually choose more fatal means by which to do their attempts. And so they're more successful at completing suicide. But you know what? Both men and women attempt at roughly the same rates. So it is a problem for both genders, but we see more successful completions by men. Okay, so what do we know then in Trinidad and Tobago? Well, we know that more men than women die by suicide. We know that there's an ethnic disparity. So more East Indians, they're overrepresented in the deaths by suicide. And in looking at the reasons, domestic disputes have been implicated a lot. So you heard Dr. Chinyonki mention that when people are having interpersonal problems with relationships. So we found this as well in the literature, that when people are having domestic disputes, problems with family, their significant others as well, it leads to more attempts. Okay, so they every 10 years they do a global school-based health survey. And in 2007, they asked secondary school students in Trinidad and Tobago whether they had seriously considered committing suicide in the previous 12 months. And look at those figures. That's 21.5% of females. That's almost 1 in 5. That's about 1 in 5 female students. And also 14% of boys seriously considered it. More recently, you can see that those numbers have gone up. So 10 years later, it's 30% of female students and 17.5% of male students. So what we are seeing then is this is not just a problem for adults. We are seeing that this is a significant issue within our young people, within our students. Okay? That same study, they also found that 17.7% of female students, 11% of males reported that they had attempted in the last year. And of those, so this study looked at a number of things, and I've just selected some of the findings there. They found that 8% of girls and 11% of boys reported that they did not have any close friends. So have a think about that. And when we talk about some of the protective factors, we realize the importance of having that social support. Okay. So did you know this? Did you know that in much of the world, suicide is stigmatized and condemned for cultural or religious reasons? But more so than that, because I think we are aware of the stigma, but in some countries, it's still punishable by law. So if you attempt and you survive, technically, that's an offense. It's a criminal offense. And so the continued criminalization of acts like these further drives the stigma. And so there's a lot of taboo. And because of that, many attempts go unrecognized, they're misclassified or deliberately hidden in records. So you know what that's telling us? That the picture is actually bigger than we think. So picture it this way. For every completion or attempt that we think that comes to the notice of officials and that enters the official numbers, it's estimated that there are 20 more that we will never know about. Okay, so then what we're facing is a serious public health problem. It's a serious social problem. Okay. So as I mentioned, I do some research in Trinidad and Tobago as well. And in this survey, so the intent is to survey persons in Trinidad, Barbados, Guyana, and Jamaica. So I wanted to select some countries with high rates and then some countries with low rates. And so I've just selected the Trinidad and Tobago sample here just to present a couple of those findings. And what we found was that 58% of persons personally knew someone who had died by suicide. 33% of persons had thought about hurting themselves or harming themselves in the past year. And 16% of persons attempted at least once in the past year. So again, we're seeing that it's something that is prevalent. It's an issue that's affecting very many people. And who were those people? Well, they ranged in age from 20 to 62 years. And these are the persons who attempted. So again, we're seeing that age is not spared, whether you are younger or you are older. 21 were females and 8 were males. In our particular sample, we realized that there were more female attempters than males. They came from different ethnicities, so it doesn't spare ethnicity as well. All religions were involved. There was not a particular religion. All educational categories, whether they had secondary schooling only or tertiary. All sexual orientation, so whether they were heterosexual or non-heterosexual. And finally, whether they were in full-time employment, whether they were unemployed, whether they were part-time or students, it affected everyone. Okay? So how do we contextualize this now in the face of COVID-19? So that data I just showed you, those findings were pre-COVID, pre-pandemic. So what we're realizing, and what mental health professionals realized from the very beginning of this pandemic, is that it was going to place everybody at heightened levels of stress, thus exacerbating people's stress levels and stressing their abilities to cope and to be resilient. Because we realize that COVID is a major global disaster. It's a global health pandemic. It has caused life changes and strains for everyone. So as your president mentioned, the fact that we're doing this virtually rather than in person, it is a chronic stressor. More than 6 months into it, we know that there's still no end in sight. And this is something we're going to be dealing with for many more months to come. And it also poses daily hassles. So whether it's having a little tech snafu like we just did a few minutes ago, whether it is just some other irritation that's related, you go out and you remember you forgot your mask. So what we realized then, it's posing a lot of stress in many different areas of people's lives. So people would have already been dealing with stress before the pandemic, and now the pandemic and its impact is going to exacerbate all of that. Okay? So what we're establishing then is that this is a public health crisis. It is a social crisis, but hope prevails. It is preventable. So let's focus a little bit now on that aspect of it. So first of all, suicide prevention is everybody's business. It's not just for psychologists and psychiatrists and social workers. It's everybody. It's a Rotaract Club, it's students, it's parents, it's the average man in the street. Everybody can be involved in suicide prevention. And one of the ways to do that is to become more aware of what the problem is, how to recognize when someone is at risk, and also how to recognize what things protect somebody from it. So that's what we're going to touch on now. So what are the risk factors and the warning signs? So the source here is from the American Society for Suicide Prevention, and I like how they separate it out into different categories. So first, look at the talk. What is this person talking about? What is the content of their conversations like, the themes of their conversations? Have they spoken about killing themselves? Have they mentioned feeling hopeless or not having a reason to live? Do they talk about being a burden to others? Do they talk about feeling trapped? Do they talk about this unenduring pain? So you heard from Dr. Chinyanki that often people don't want to die. They just want to be relieved, to get relief from the pain that they're experiencing. So any of these things you want to see as signs and you want to take them seriously. And you do want to check in with this person and ask them some more about how they're feeling. And you can ask them directly if they're thinking about hurting themselves, if they're thinking about killing themselves. We also might want to look at their behavior, because not everybody may express themselves verbally. So if you, especially if this person may have been through a difficult event or suffered a loss or some change. So for example, it could be something like grief. Maybe they've lost a loved one. But we're also having people face a lot of different changes in the pandemic. So people have lost their jobs or they have lost a lot of their income. So it's putting a lot of stress on households. So you do want to look for behaviors. So for example, have they increased their use of substances? Are they looking for ways to end their lives? So they're searching for information on how to kill themselves. Are they withdrawing from activities? So things, and we have to take that with a pinch of salt, because to a certain extent, we've all had to withdraw from some activities. You know, we all can't just pick up and say we're going to the beach, so no more beach. So we do have to look at those persons as well. Okay, so I'm just gonna allow some. Right, so continuing on with the behaviors, you also want to look for, are they isolating themselves from family and friends? And we do want to measure that against COVID protective behaviors. So yes, we are physically distancing, but in this isolation, you also want to look at whether people are isolating themselves in terms of they don't even want to talk or communicate. They're not checking in by phone or checking in by other means. So if you do find that people are withdrawing or isolating more so than we expect during this time, that might be a red flag as well. Are they sleeping too much or too little? So you can go either way. Have they been saying goodbye to people, giving away possessions? Are you also seeing behaviors like aggression or just consistent and constant fatigue? Now, one of these in and of itself, you may think, well, I kind of tired every day, but I don't think that makes me suicidal. So it's not that I'm saying that each one of these in and of itself is a sign, but we do want to be aware, because you may start to notice other signs as well. But then even if you notice one sign, maybe you might just want to check in and see if the person is in a healthy space. With respect to people's mood, if you're seeing any of these, depression, anxiety, they're losing interest, they're more irritable, and especially it's sustained stuff. We all have ups and downs depending on how our day is going. But what we're looking for is if you are seeing changes in their mood and personality, so they're not themselves. So are you seeing more feelings of them being humiliated? Are they agitated? Are they really angry? Now, a lot of people assume that suicide is only something people with a mental health illness do, so that people who attempt are mentally ill. And while a significant number of people who attempt do have mental illnesses, not everybody who does attempt has a mental illness. So there's a relationship between these two, but they're not. It's not a one-to-one relationship. So if somebody does have a mental health condition, if they're not managing it well, it could put them at higher risk. So depression, substance use problems, bipolar disorder, personality traits that might lend itself to poor coping. If somebody has a serious or chronic health condition, or then chronic pain, again, it may put them at more risk. If somebody has had a traumatic brain injury, so it might be affected in their cognitive functioning as well. So another thing we want to consider then are some of the environmental factors. So we are talking about what things they say and then how they are acting, but we also need to pay attention to what's going on around them. Do they have access to lethal means? So for example, in the US, you see many, many more people dying by gunshots because they have much more access to firearms. In Trinidad and Tobago, you find more people dying by hanging, by poisoning, by misuse of prescription medication. So are they experiencing stresses in their social lives? So harassment, bullying, relationship problems, unemployment. Have they had some kind of loss or conflict? So death, divorce, job loss, etc. We've had a lot of people losing jobs. We've had a lot of families being affected. I hear anecdotally, and it's very distressing every time I hear of it, about petrogen workers who, as we know, would have been retrenched over a year ago, but we're still seeing fallout from that. And many other companies have had job losses. So that's something for us to pay more attention to. Families where people have lost their jobs, that could put them at risk. And there's something interesting about suicide. When we advertise it, or when the media talks about it and there's exposure to other people's suicide, there's usually a blip or an increase in attempts shortly after. So that effect has been consistently noticed. It's called a Werther effect. So that's why you will find that a lot of these agencies put out really careful guidelines to media on how to report on suicides and not to do certain things. So in terms of what kind of information to put out and what information you should not put out. So there is a way to report on it in a sensitive manner to try and decrease some of these impacts. And finally, you do want to look out for historical factors. So if you have had somebody who has attempted before, it does not necessarily mean that they will do it again, but it does put them at higher risk. So this is one of the strongest predictors. If somebody has tried before, so oftentimes on the psychiatry ward, when we're taking a history and it's for somebody who has attempted suicide and you ask them, you will see that they have attempted before. You also want to look out for family history. So if there is a family history of suicide, it also predisposes them and puts them at higher risk. People who have had adverse childhood experiences, childhood abuse, neglect, trauma, again, they can be at higher risk. So hopefully now you're getting a sense of all the different ways that we can try to look for warning signs, detect some of these warning signs, little things that might clue us in as to when we might want to check in with somebody when we realize that they're dealing with any of the things that I've mentioned so far. So those were the risk factors, but then how do we, remember we're also talking about prevention. So we're saying that suicide is preventable. How then do we prevent it? And so we prevent it by knowing more about the protective factors and boosting these factors, both in ourselves and the ones around us. So if you do want to insulate yourself some more, here are some of the that you want to top up on. So perhaps you can do your own personal audit of where you stand on some of these factors And also to think about when you are interacting with persons and you think that they're going through a difficult time, you might want to think about maybe some of these things they need to boost as well, and how might you help support them in boosting it. So one of the first things that's associated with being a protective factor is having personal resilience. Yeah? So having positive coping styles, having problem-solving skills, being able to adapt to situations. So when you do take a hit, when you are faced with a stressor, you have enough coping skills in your reservoir to be able to withstand that pressure. The other thing, and I can't emphasize this enough, especially during the pandemic, you do want to maintain that social connectedness. So having a sense of connection to others, friends, family, your community, you have your Rotaract community. Having that sense of connection is very protective. And I do want to put a caveat here. So social connectedness is only helpful in as much as it's healthy social support. So you do want to be wary of social groups that have conflict in them. You know, there's a lot of bacchanal, a lot of cliquing, a lot of infighting in the group, people throwing words. You find yourself feeling stressed out because it's quite a negative experience, then that is not a good source of social support. So you might want to audit some of your social networks and figure out who do you want to unfollow? Which group might you want to mute? Who might you want to unfriend or just limit your interaction with? And then the ones that you find do give you that support, those are the ones you want to boost and keep your connections with. So the third one is having a significant other. And so this can come through the form of, for a child, having a caring adult, or for adults, having a caring partner. Now, I will say this, and they've noted this has been in the literature and conversations and magazines. It's quite a difficult time to be a single person during the pandemic. When I think back to my days at university, I would say I pretty much met most people either on campus or at the club. And this was on St. Augustine campus, and this was on the Mona campus where I studied as well. By the time I got to England, I was a little bit older, so I wasn't as much interested in socializing as I was with my career. So I think it's a difficult thing to be single right now. How are you going to meet people and interact with people? So hopefully you still have that social connectedness. And if you do have a significant other, you recognize the protective factor that's involved in that. Maybe you are a significant other to someone else. Maybe you can be that person to a child in your life, or to a friend, to a neighbor, etc. Having a positive sense of self is also really important. And this imbues in you a sense of control over life circumstances. So you're not feeling as though everything is happening around you without your control. And so there's a concept called fatalism, which I'm also interested in and hoping to do some research in. And that suggests that, things are determined. You don't have control. The fates will decide for you. So you just have to endure. So when negative things happen, that's just your lot in life and you have to put up with it. And so there's some trains of thought that think that high belief in fatalism can lend itself to more acceptable attitudes about suicide. So to counter that then, remember we spoke about resilience, and then we also need this positive sense of self, this self-determination where you have control over your life and you can do things to help bring about positive change. So many of us are also spiritual. Whether you are religious, whether you are spiritual, whether you live by a sense, whether you have your personal morals and values, these things are important. And as it pertains to suicide, having the belief that that is not going to be an option for you is a protective thing. That no matter how challenging things get, you will choose another option. So having an attitude that does not see suicide as an option is something that is protective. And you know, sometimes it just comes down to bread and butter as well. So I mentioned about people being under more financial stress and strain during the pandemic. And guess what? If you do have a safe and stable environment and economic security, that is protective. So if you don't have it, that's going to be harder. So especially for older people who now may be living on a reduced income, if they are facing additional stressors, that can be particularly challenging for them. So this is a factor, especially for older people. But I think now that we are facing so much economic uncertainty because of the pandemic, that we're going to see this being more of an issue. So if you know people who are struggling financially, who have unstable jobs and careers, that's something we want to be aware of. And so you've heard Dr. Chinyanki talk about mental health. I myself mentioned it a little bit. So having good, positive mental health is important. Having that ability to deal with difficult circumstances, manage your emotions, how do you manage stress? How do you cope effectively and not maladaptively? These things are important. So if you have good mental health, if you are higher on that continuum of wellness and optimal well-being, that's going to be protective for you as well. And then some of these are related to services. So when people are struggling, we want them to be able to get help. So if we're able to detect it earlier and get them access to treatment, that is going to be protective. And you know what? There are a number of things that's going to influence this. First, we have to combat against the stigma. Because to say you want help, you have to be brave enough to disclose that. And so many people, this can be a barrier because it's a taboo topic, so they may not want to talk about their mental health struggles. But I heard some of your members at the beginning of your session talk about disclosing the struggles they were going through. And so that's a brave thing, and that's something we want to discourage, because that is going to facilitate early detection and people getting access to the help that they need. Now, what we also need to do is restrict access to the means by which people use to attempt suicide. So restricting access to weapons and controlling access to certain substances. So for example, take substances like Gramoxone and Lanate, which are used frequently in Trinidad and Tobago. So much so that when they look at the pattern of deaths by suicide, it's associated with the geographic, the agricultural belt, in Trinidad and Tobago. Why is it associated with the agricultural belt? Because it's farmers who are going to have more use for pesticides and therefore have more access to pesticides. So the ministry has already they do take measures to try and control access. So you're not supposed to be able to buy it anywhere. And when you do buy it, you're supposed to sign for it, etc. In some countries, what they also attempted, so for example, I remember studying Sri Lanka, they gave out lock boxes. So pretty much it's just a metal box with a lock in it for people to lock away the pesticides. So the idea is that if you restrict access, it might deter somebody from actually going through and completing. Now, that was a good attempt. It wasn't incredibly successful because when they followed up, they realized people would actually lock in the boxes. They'd put it in there, but they weren't locking it. So there's still some ways to go to control that. A few years ago, the ministry did a mental health caravan for suicide awareness as well. And one of the first groups they did it with was the men who worked in vector control. So you know the men who come around spraying for mosquitoes? So when you think about it, these are the men who are going to have access to those insecticides. So that was one of the first groups that they looked at, raising awareness and also talking about then control and access to these substances. So number 10, social skills. Having better social skills, more effective social skills is also going to be protective. So how you're able to deal with your anger and frustration, how you're able to resolve a problem and make decisions about what's going on in your life. So all of these things we're thinking of, then we can figure out how to include them in interventions. So I could see something like this for young people in secondary schools, where we help build their social skills. We help build their emotional intelligence and emotional regulation. And that's going to serve as a protective factor. Okay? And optimism. So who are the optimists amongst us? Who sees the glass as half full always? So guess what? Optimism is actually a protective thing, having hope for the future. So if you can picture a better future, that's good. So for example, one of the theories about depression is that they say it consists of a negative triad, a negative cognitive triad. So Aaron Beck came up with this, and he said people with clinical depression have negative views about themselves. They have negative views about people and the world around them, and they also have negative views about the future. So when you have that triad, it causes people now to just spiral down. So having hope for the future. So it could be that right now, you don't feel too great about yourself, and you think the people around you are a bit shitty, but guess what? You have hope for a better life in the future. So that optimism can be one of the things that can help get you through whatever dark spot you're in. So I think I mentioned this one already, so I might have just a duplicate there. So how about this one? Opportunities to participate in and contribute to school or community projects and activities. And so I took your flyer, one of your Project Hope flyers, to illustrate this one. So having a sense of meaning, having opportunities to contribute, to be involved in something that's bigger than you is actually protective as well. So this way, you see how things are related. So this one facilitates a social connectedness. This one facilitates having meaning for your life and having hope for things. So don't underscore the value of the what you are doing in your group. And so attached to that one, I would say responsibilities and duties to others. So when we feel as though, you know what, so many times you talk to people and they may be having suicidal thoughts, but then they say something like, yeah, but I wouldn't do that. You know, I can't do that to my kids. And so that is a double-edged sword, because we don't ever want to use that against somebody to say, how could you think of doing that? Think about your family. The blaming never works, and it makes people feel worse about themselves. However, if you feel as though you do have a bigger duty to others and you do have a responsibility that's important to you, that can also be protective. Okay? And so this is one of my favorites. And what I've done is I've put my, well, she was a kitten then, she's a juvenile now. So that's Kitana. And so she's an incredible source of everything, happiness, optimism, connectedness, especially during this pandemic where I'm doing a lot more remote work from home. She's never too far from the office or wherever I am. And so I'm sure there are some pet lovers amongst the group, and you will fully understand this one. But a lot of the literature as well has spoken about the benefits of having a pet and how much they can help with your coping, with your mental health, etc. Thank you, Tiana. And yes, Emily, I see you agree with me as well. And finally, I think this is the last one. And I think I may have missed out one, which I'll mention now. So remember I mentioned optimism. So hopefulness as well is really important. So tied into that optimism for the future is having hope for a better future. And finally, this one is support for help seeking. So a few months ago, I got a call. So if you're in the Faculty of Medical Sciences, you may know that I do crisis counseling for medical students. I offer these one-off sessions before I refer you on to CAPS or another facility. And so I got a call from a student, but guess what? It wasn't for him. He wanted to find out if I would be willing to see his friend who was struggling. So first he wanted to find out if I would be willing to see the friend. And of course I said yes. And then the next step was convincing the friend to come. And so he passed the contact information along. We arranged for an appointment, and even went so far as to, you know, give his friend the information about where to go to. And that could be really important as well. Just being there for your friend, helping them with what they need. So you may not, you don't have to solve their problems for them. That's not what you need to do. Often you just need to be there, to show up, to listen, and help where you can. So supporting people's help-seeking behavior is also, or having support rather, for your help-seeking behavior is also quite protective. Okay, so as we've gone through those, so those were 16 protective factors, and in many different spheres of life. So hopefully you're seeing that these are the different ways that we could boost our resilience, we can boost our coping skills, we can build capacity within people to resist some of these stresses that might lead them to consider suicide. So that brings me close to the end of my presentation, but guess what? We're going to wrap up with another quiz. So I know you've been paying attention, so let's test that some more. Okay, so in the chat again, share with me what you think your response to this question is. Only men attempt suicide. Okay, so far, unanimously false answers. So just to clarify that, more men die by suicide. Men complete suicide more because they tend to choose more lethal means. So things like hanging or poison, whereas women may choose less lethal means like an overdose of pills or pain medication or prescription medication. So yes, you are quite correct. Both men and women attempt. So that is false. Good job. Okay, how about this one? Religious persons aren't affected by suicide. So you can just pray all your troubles away, and so if you're religious, you will not be affected by suicide. Okay, so I see a lot of B's, again, unanimously B's. And so I do want to put the caveat here. So I did mention that spirituality, having religious beliefs can be protective. But we also want to make it clear, and many religious leaders support this as well, that if you are struggling, you should go and get support. So it's not enough. So your faith is going to be a huge support, but it may not be the only solution to your problems. So we do know that, yes, it does not spare religion. Many religions are affected by suicide. So this statement is false. So well done. So far, everybody's getting everything correct. All right, how about this one? A previous suicide attempt is a risk factor for a future attempt. What do you think about that? Is that true or false? Okay, so I see mostly A's. I see one B. What do you think? More A's again. True. More trues. And yes. So we know that it is a risk factor. It's one of the biggest risk factors. If you have had a history, it puts you at increased risk. It does not mean that you are going to, because remember, it's preventable. So if we intervene in time, hopefully we can get people the help and support they need so that it's not an option for the future, but it is a risk factor. Okay? How about this one? Old people are not affected by suicide. Well, what they have to worry about? They live in their life. You know, they don't have the stresses that young people have of having to work and being single and having to find a partner. Old people should be happy, right? Right, so most of you are saying it's false. And indeed, that's false. So what we do know is that old people are affected. All ages are affected. So in fact, suicide is the second leading cause of death for persons aged 15 to 24 in the country. But it also affects older persons as well. As you could see from the study findings, we had persons in their 60s who were attempted. Okay, so a few more, 3 more. having strong social connections is a protective factor against risk of suicide. Social connections. Is it a protective factor? Yeah, so we're seeing all of the A's. I see one B. Somebody says it's false. Well, the majority of you say A, that it is true, and yes, it is true. So having strong social connections is protective, and remember the caveat. So that should be healthy social connections. So not ones with bacchanal, not ones with conflict. So healthy social connections is indeed a protective factor. And so much so that healthy social support is one of the strongest predictors of aging well. So I know many of you seem to be in your younger years, but as you get up to my age and older, you're going to realize how important social support is. And that's not a number. So it's not about having a bunch of friends. You have 2,000 Facebook friends. No, it's just about having quality social support. Okay? How about this one? It's okay to talk about suicide. You're not going to hurt or encourage the person. Should you? Are you sure? What if you say the wrong thing? What if, you don't want to be fast because you don't want to tip them over the edge? So this one, so I'm seeing unanimously A's as well, and you are correct. Sorry. That's my error on the screen. Yes, that is true. It is okay to talk about suicide. That is one of the biggest myths. To tell you how big an issue that is, even mental health professionals are sometimes wary, or health professionals are sometimes wary to ask about suicide because people are afraid that they're going to say the wrong thing. But unless you are a psychopath who has very subversive or malicious intentions, you won't say the wrong thing. So just by asking somebody, have you thought about killing yourself? Did you make a plan? Just listening to them is not going to encourage people. In fact, it often helps them to open up and to explore other options. And it clues you in as to whether, they might need some additional help. So it is okay to talk about suicide. And finally, here's this one again. I asked it at the beginning, thought we'd end off with it again. What do we think? Is it preventable or not? So it is quite a scary thing. A lot of people, we see it as it's such a finite act. And so it can be very daunting that people think, well, I don't know, what could I do? I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist. What can I do? But hopefully you've been seeing all of the different ways that you can be aware, ways in which you can be supportive. And yes, definitely this one is true. Okay, so well done. I think all of you passed this quiz with flying colors. I think most of you got everything correct. So that ends my presentation to you. And just as you have been advocating for, I also wanted to share this. And as soon as we end your session, I'm going to go put up my virtual candle on social media as well. Okay, so I do want to thank you very much for your attentions. And if you do have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing and pass over privileges back to you, Johans. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Khadija, for that presentation. It was very informative, and I'm sure the information you shared with us would help a lot of people. Now, I'd like to invite Matthew to do the virtual vigil. Okay, thank you, Matthew. Now I'd like to introduce the president of UWI's Peer Counselor Association, Ms. Vaishmati Ramlokan, to tell you more about themselves and what they do.
Good night. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Let me just. Good night. So, I hope everyone is doing well. As previously addressed, depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation are prevalent issues. Sadly, people tend to keep their emotions and their fears in, and that's really bad. But I'm here to remind you that you have intrinsic value, you matter, and there are people who care about you. If you feel like you can't bear the stresses of life and that you need someone to talk to, please feel free to reach out to someone, a family member, a friend, or even a fellow peer. We, the Peer Counseling Association, are a group of students at the University of the West Indies who counsel fellow students. We have been trained by counselors at CAPS, the Counseling and Psychological Services at UWI, in a program called Mind the Gap towards psychological health and wellness. It's actually a co-curricular course, COCR 1033, and it's directed by Dr. Chen Young-Ki, who is here tonight and had presented before Dr. Khan. And the theory is taught by various counselors at UWI. Upon completion of the theory, as well as practical training sessions held by the PCA, a student becomes an official peer counselor, and we begin our service, which is essentially listening, being a friend, and being a confidant for anyone who reaches out to us. Our counselors deal with a lot of issues because students have tremendous stresses in their lives. Student life, personal issues, academics, relationships, jobs, all of these issues affect students. We understand that things can get difficult, and we've trained in order to be able to provide confidential counseling with kindness and care. To contact us for counseling, students must simply fill out the counseling request Google Doc found in our Instagram and Facebook pages. The responses are automatically sent to us, and we make every effort to connect counselees to an appropriate counselor as soon as possible. Once that's done, session days and times are discussed, and counseling goes on for the rest of that semester. I'd like to point out that life before this global issue had its pros and cons. There were issues that may not be present now because of the circumstances. However, there are many issues that have come about because of the pandemic. It's not easy being away from what you've known, being at home or called out to work. Simply being here in this very stressful and uncertain time can take a toll on your mental health and consequently your overall well-being. If you need a friend, a confidant, a listener, I encourage you to reach out to someone. And please know that you can reach out to us, the Peer Counseling Association. You are not alone. We care about you.
Thank you, Ms. Ramlokan.
You're welcome. And thank you for the opportunity to speak here today as well.
You're very welcome. Okay, so now we'd have an open floor. So all the questions that you all sent in, or if you have more questions, you can still send it in. We would present the questions to our panelists, which includes Ms. Ramlokan, Dr. Khan, and Dr. Chinyanki.
Okay, hi everyone. So I'll be reading the questions to you. So I'll read it, and the panelists, you'll decide who wants to answer, whether it's Dr. Chinyanki or Ms. Ramlokan or Dr. Khadija Khan. So the first question was, as someone who has attempted suicide, I feel very uncomfortable when people in my family make jokes about suicide. How should I deal with something like that? Dr. Key?
Right, that's kind of tricky. I think it's something about actually explaining to people in your family how you feel when those jokes are made. I have no idea whether they're trying to make light to kind of, you know, keep it in the conversation, but it probably doesn't feel very sensitive or supportive. So maybe there's something about maybe picking somebody in the family that's more approachable, more likely to be an ally, and maybe having that private conversation with them first to try and help people understand how you actually feel. That would be my suggestion.
Okay, thank you, Dr. P. Dr. Khan, do you want to add anything? Or next stage,
No, I think Dr. Chinyanki covered all the aspects. I really do agree with finding the most approachable person in the family and starting the conversation there, and you can co-opt them to help discuss it with the rest of the family. And so because the question came, I know it's probably affecting somebody in the group, so I really hope that they get a little bit of relief and to keep the hope. So sometimes families are difficult, and sometimes you may not get the response you want from them. So they may continue to be insensitive and not realize what you're trying to tell them. So I would say also making sure you have other sources of support. So a friend, friends, or another social group to help bolster you through that experience. Okay.
Thank you. So the other question was, what is the best way to respond to a friend that might be struggling without seeming pushy? Dr. Chinya.
I think that is a tricky balance because nobody wants to come across as pushy or invasive. And I think really it's about being straightforward and actually saying, hey, I don't want to be pushy at all, but I'm a little worried, or, you know, sometimes you say, hey, if there's anything you want to talk about, and they go, no, I'm good. And you say something like, well, if you change your mind, you know, I'm open. I think it's very important to go back and say, hey, I'm just checking in to see if you were, because sometimes we say that and then nobody ever comes back a second time, and it's actually really hard to initiate the conversation. So I think it's perfectly okay to go back a second time, check in for an opportunity, and just actually say, I hope if I'm being too pushy, you'd let me know. Yeah?
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to just add, if I may, that sometimes people have different personalities. So a friend who may come across as pushy might just be there, I guess, a personality clash with the person who needs the help. So I think knowing that that's your friend, you need to take that into consideration and know how to approach them. People have different ways of understanding and appreciating, like when someone reaches out to them. So just understand that your friend may need to be approached a different way because they are struggling. So just keep that in mind when you're approaching them.
Thank you. So another question, what do you do if your family are the ones who make you feel to commit? Dr. Khan?
So that's a very difficult one, especially in the face of the pandemic now, when we're all under more restrictions. So that leads to, you know, what if home is not a safe space for you? What if home is one of your bigger sources of stress? So this is where some of your personal qualities, like having that resilience, having that optimism, having enough coping mechanisms to get you through what you're going through. Now, if the situation is abusive, and even if it's not abusive, if you find it unbearable and you think that you are struggling to cope, I do encourage you to reach out and talk to someone. So you can talk to your peer counselors, you can get some help, some professional help by seeing a psychologist or a psychiatrist. But I really do encourage you to talk to somebody about it. And that can help you explore what your options are. Sometimes if there are options, talking to somebody can help you problem solve. But that's only when you do have alternatives available to you. Sometimes not all problems have readily available solutions or options. So therefore, the way to deal with that is more dealing with the emotional impact of it. How do you deal with the emotional distress that it's causing you? So if there's nothing you could do about your family situation, you don't have any options for another place to be, then it might be how do you cope with the negative fallout of the emotions. So more emotion-focused coping would help there. And again, talking to someone. Don't struggle alone. Express yourselves, find a confidant, and explore some of what your options are.
So follow up to that question, another question was, how do I begin to express my mental health issues with others?
So I'm just gonna how do I begin to express my mental health issues with others? And I'm going to say that in two ways, because I actually have a slide that I use sometimes with how to check in with people about their mental health and what questions to ask. And so I'll start there with how to check in with somebody, and then I'll circle back to how do you talk about it. So one of the things that prohibits us is the stigma. We think it's taboo. We feel awkward. We feel a little bit that like people are going to judge us. So we need to destigmatize that. And one of the ways is for us to check in. Let's normalize checking in on each other. So let's say, Daniela, how you going, girl? And when you answer, I good. And then I say, no, really, how you going? And then I'm looking to see the signs to see if your really was just, a routine cover up. I'll give you an example. Once at one of the universities I worked with, I had a friend who was pregnant, a colleague who was pregnant. So I'm passing in the corridor and I just say, hi, Anna, how are you doing? And I'm just expecting her to say fine. And I was continuing walking. But then she says, I feel awful. This pregnancy is the worst thing ever. And I just thought I stopped in my tracks because I was expecting the polite exchange of, I'm good, you're good. And so I had to stop because her having disclosed this now, I can't just say, all right, then take care and continue like a full boss. So you want to be able to know how to check in with your friends by asking the questions, but you also want to be able to stop and listen when they do open up to you. So asking them how you're going, asking people, I ask my friends as well, you're eating okay? You're sleeping? You're drinking enough water? You do anything fun these days? Are you getting enough rest and relaxation? Are you recharging yourself? And so to get back to the question asked, how do I talk about my mental health? I would say, pick who you want to talk about it with. Pick somebody you think who is like-minded, who shares some of your philosophy, where you can talk about things like that. You can talk about your mental health. So you could say something like, gosh, I'm just feeling so stressed out these days. And then you open the conversation. But that's where the social support and social connectedness is so important. But go brave. Trust that your friends care about you. Trust that your friends don't just want to hear that you're good and you're doing all right and the polite responses. Trust that your friends really care about what you're going through. Okay?
Thank you. And another one here for Dr. Chinyanki. Can I have a normal, active life and still be suicidal and depressed?
I think a lot of people have outwardly functional lives, do well in school, keep on their jobs, do all their obligations and responsibilities, and seem great to other people, and may even be the life of the party and the funniest person in the group. But if the person on the inside is feeling depressed and suicidal, I definitely think they deserve a space where they can talk about it. And I find often that when people outwardly look so great and functional, they absolutely tend not to talk to their friends about it. And sometimes it's a little bit, no, I'm the one that people come to, so I can't possibly be the one that's struggling. And I suppose maybe they might be more likely to talk to somebody neutral. Ironically, that's when someone may actually want to talk to a professional, because it's outside of their life and their social circle, and that's their job. So I suppose the question is it possible? Yes, it's possible. I'm assuming the question wasn't, is it okay if I am? My answer to that would be, nah, you need a little space to think about what has you feeling so depressed, for sure. So I guess my question to that person might be to consider, what might some spaces be where I can actually be a bit more open about how I'm feeling and with whom.
Thank you for that. Back to Dr. Khadija again, the person followed up. I've told people already, but I feel like I hear the same thing over and over. How do I deal with that?
Oh, you see, now I want a little expanding of what you mean by you hear the same thing over and over. So it could also be that so there are different sources of support and different levels of support. And so I think reaching out to friends is a really good source of support. But if you found that you've reached out to different friends and that it's not helping you, then maybe you might want to think about seeking another source of support. So you might want to think about speaking to a peer counselor, speaking to a professional, speaking to a pastoral counselor. Okay, so don't just stop at one source. And sometimes you do have to be willing to, and I know it's a difficult thing to open up. And sometimes when you open up and you don't get the response, you don't feel validated, it can be a little bit daunting and it makes you not want to open up again. But it's really important, and you deserve it. You deserve support. So perhaps reach out to another source of support.
I think, could I just jump in there? Because I absolutely agree with that. And I think how disappointing it can be when you build yourself up to share and then you don't get something back that you were hoping for. But I find that sometimes it's actually helpful to think, what am I hoping for? Would be something supportive that I'm actually seeking and would like to hear. Because sometimes everybody's different. Maybe they want something practical. Maybe they just want to be listened to. Maybe they just don't want a cliche answer. And I think the reality check, as we're kind of struggling with, is not everybody knows what to say. And sometimes there isn't something wonderful to say. And what I often, suggest to people is, if you're not sure what to say, sometimes it's important to say that. You know how we like to have this habit to go, girl, I hear you, or I understand? Yeah, don't say I understand if you don't understand. I think it's perfectly okay to say, you know what, I've never actually experienced something like this before myself. So I am kind of struggling to understand, but tell me a bit more, because I want to understand a bit more of that. So if you're not getting what you want, think about what you want.
And Sarah, I'm going to jump back on, because you made me think of something else as well. Sometimes it helps to also let people know. So if they are responding, and oftentimes if they are your friends, they are well-intentioned, so they want to support you, but it could be that they're not supporting you in the way you want. So communicating that need to them. So for example, if you express yourself, so if you say, when I tell you that I'm struggling, that school is really frustrating, I don't want you to try and problem solve it for me. What I really want from you is to hear that you understand. So sometimes being able to communicate how you want your needs to be met, and not assuming people are mind readers. Sometimes that's some of the mistakes we make. We think that they should know what I want, but no, we need to communicate it. So that calls, for that self-awareness as well about, as Dr. Chinyanki said, what are you hoping for? and then how can you get that need met in a healthy way?
Thank you. We have a lot of questions coming in. So someone asked, as someone who has attempted multiple times, I wasn't allowed back home for some time. I was told that I was an embarrassment. I wasn't blessed with too many friends. What avenues are there for someone like me with no time or energy, or actually maybe who actually may be too ashamed to see a counselor?
I think that one's a tricky one, and I suppose not really understanding what the person's situation is. It sounds like there's a lot of shame associated with going home, and it sounds like they're feeling very rejected about home. I'm kind of assuming that they're living somewhere else.
They said, sorry to cut you off. They said at first they weren't allowed to be back home for a while until, yeah.
Right, okay, so it sounds like they're back home and it's just really uncomfortable. And I think that one of the things that we keep coming back to and bumping up is the stigma about mental health generally. And very often a lack of understanding in a way leaves space for people to seem very uncaring, unfortunately. And even if they do care, sometimes tough love comes across as almost abusive, right? So I think that it's really important, if you're in an environment that isn't supportive and that may in fact be abusive and shaming, that you really do need to get access to different perspectives. And if social circle is a bit thin on the ground, then yeah, I'd encourage you to think about maybe professional spaces. So people that you could have some faith in would have some understanding of where you're coming from. And if that's not, you'd rather poke your own eyes out than see a therapist, I would really kind of challenge, what's the worst that could happen, right? And as Dr. Khan was saying, when you go back to your friend and say, well, actually, I was kind of hoping for this and so on, that also applies to therapists, okay? So some therapists are terrible, right? Others are well-meaning, but they don't always get what you want. So if you have a session and it's kind of disappointing, don't crawl back. Psych yourself up to go and say, do you know what, when I came in for the session, I was really hoping to have a plan in my head, or I was hoping for something more practical, or I wish we'd focused on this instead. Give that therapist another chance. And if they really, aren't super, then you need to be prepared to see somebody else. So don't let one disappointing experience put you off entirely. So if there's not a lot of social support and family life is really difficult, I would really gently but firmly encourage the person to reach out, maybe for a bit more professional space, peer counselors, all of that might be a bit more welcoming. I hope that helps.
Thank you. So another person asked, is it normal to think about ending your life? Is it normal to think about what ending your life will be like, but not doing it because you're afraid of going through with it? And all the methods are painful, knowing that all the methods are painful.
So if I could jump in there. So having the thought about ending your life, or thinking about what the world might be like if you weren't there, that is not an abnormal thing. As I showed you from some of the data, it's more common than we think. Interestingly, what you mentioned after, the thing that would deter you from going through with it, because I don't like pain, I don't want to suffer, that is actually a protective factor. So the British Psychological Society about 6 years ago put out some guidance on prevention of suicide, and it listed that as one of the psychological protective factors, having an aversion to pain and discomfort and risk-taking. So that's not a bad thing. It does not make you strange or weird. It does not mean that you're in danger. Having the thought in your head and then figuring out, no, that's not for me, I'll have to find some other way to deal with stresses, that's not a bad thing.
Okay, and I asked my mom to go see a psychiatrist, but we can't afford it. I don't know what to do.
Okay, so that's a tough one because mental health services in our country are oversubscribed and there's certainly not enough resources available. So I would suggest two things. If you are a university student, remember we do have the CAPS facility and we do have health services, and there is a psychiatrist that's available for students. And also you can access a psychiatrist at any of the public health facilities. So the wellness centers, so based on where you are. So for example, if you're in Chaguanas, there's a Chaguanas Stress Relief Clinic. If you are closer to the east, so at Mt.Hope at the outpatient clinic in Arima. So at most of these public health facilities and wellness centers, you can access free psychiatric services. Okay, now the Ministry of Health on their website has a listing. They have a mental health services directory listing for the entire country, and they're separated by region, so north, south, east, etc. So depending on where you are and where it's easiest for you to access, I do encourage you to have a look at the directory and to seek out the help that you want.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dr. Khan. So this one is for Veshmati. How do you cope after someone confides to you with troubling or scary personal stories?
Okay, so as a peer counselor, we are taught how to interpret certain situations, and certain stories will be a bit heavy. And if that's the case, then the counselee, if these stories or these things they're being told is too much for the counselor to bear, the counselor can be passed on to another counselor, or the counselor can talk to another counselor. There's that within the thing too. Yeah, the words there's counseling essentially is if one counselor cannot bear what is their counselor is saying, the burden that they have to carry from them, they can speak to another counselor about it, and that's just ease the burden. However, we understand what we are getting into before we decide to be a peer counselor, and you have to have a certain level of strength, emotional strength, to be able to do any type of counseling, and to bear your burdens as well as someone else's is not easy. But if you really can't, there are different ways you can turn to. It means you can use and utilize in order to make your experience less burdensome as a counselor. Counselees, there's a rule within the PCA where which is that every semester, like if a counselee is assigned to a counselor, and you want to, let's say you assigned in semester 1 to someone and you want to get counseled again in semester 2, you can't be assigned to the same counselor because of different reasons, mainly because of attachment reasons, and also because sometimes one person's issues over and over can be a bit daunting and detrimental to your mental health as a counselor as well. There's a lot of factors, but essentially, yeah, that's it. That we have systems in place to ensure that our mental health is taken care of as well, because we're people as well. So I hope this answered the question.
Thank you, Ms. Ramika. So another question is, how should we respond to the many stigmas and taboos within our very traditionalistic society associated with mental health issues and suicide? Dr. B.
Yeah, I think I'm really going to encourage everyone to think about how can you be an ally, or if you're feeling bolder, how can you be an advocate? I think that in our culture we make a lot of jokes, sometimes maybe with good intention, but as we've heard from some people, can be very insensitive as well. I think there's something about how do I actually not go along with the jokes out of embarrassment, or maybe say, hey, actually suicide is really complex. Like, I really find it so funny because so many people are suffering, because when you actually articulate that kind of thing and you don't just like laugh with everybody else, somebody in that group might actually notice go along with that, you know? And I think there's something about communicating what your ideas are about mental health, right? So it could be about initiating a conversation or modeling, being a little bit more open about what you might be struggling with, or something that you find helpful when you're very stressed, or the fact that, yes, gosh, I was depressed before and this is what helped me. I think actually offering that and sharing your experiences kind of helps normalize it for other people. And all of these things are little ways that we can counteract that enormous stigma that we struggle with. Yeah? I don't know if there's any specific examples the person had in mind, but that would be my idea generally, right?
Thank you. Another question. Good night. I'm a final year student, and I would like to ask about a friend with what he said is refractory depression. Multiple specialists have seen this person and are at a loss. You would never know he's anything more than just sad. He's insanely high functioning, but he's admitted to losing hope. He said he's tried everything and is tired. He wants to end it. In a life where he feels like he's run his course, is there any avenue for him?
I'm going to jump in. I think that actually it's very worrying if someone has lots of experiences with professionals and they feel like they're not getting anywhere. I think that can be very despairing. But I think it's very important actually not to give up hope. I think what the path to recovery for every individual will be different. So I'm not quite sure what access this person has to help, but as a friend, I guess I would encourage him to keep trying to engage with maybe other professionals to see what other support might be out there. I definitely think it's important not to give up on that. And like I said, not that I'm panning the professionals, don't take it the wrong way, but sometimes you can have really negative experiences with them. But the important thing is actually to keep engaging. Yeah?
Thank you. Dr. Khan, this is also a follow-up question. I have asked to go to a wellness center, but I was told I was simply looking for attention. So I've just been dealing with it by myself.
Okay, so it's really difficult when you're trying to get help to go and seek treatment and you get rejected. And especially, I really hate that word. You're looking for attention. We abuse that word in this country. So culturally now it has a connotation that's very negative. And so I wish people would see it in a positive light, that when people are so-called seeking attention, help them, give them the help that they're looking for. So what I would suggest is that if that source won't help you, do you have any other options? So for example, once you're 18 and over, you can self-refer and you can walk into any facility on your own. So you don't need a parent to go with you. You can go in on your own. You can call and make your own appointment. I don't know if there are other issues such as transportation, etc. But then this is where some of that problem solving comes in, that you try to think about, okay, well, if I've identified the place that I need to go to, and if I've called and I've been able to schedule an appointment, then how do I figure out how to get there? And perhaps you could reach out to your wider circle of support and see if there are other people who might be willing to help you with that. So because one person has an opinion that's negative, one person has been a little bit rejecting, I don't want you to internalize that, to say that, well, if this person says I'm seeking attention, then maybe they're right. No. Trust in yourself, believe in yourself. The fact that you recognize and realize you need help is enough. It's enough for you to then go and get the help you need and the help you deserve. So I hope that helps as well.
Thank you. Most times I feel like I'm never enough. Like I'm always the lesser person in the group. In the group, I suffer with anxiety as well. I have no self-confidence and I think I'm ugly. I'm not suicidal, but I decided to live pushing everyone away and being alone.
Gosh, that's a whole lot of negative beliefs. So I see a lot of negative self-beliefs, but also a lot of comparing. And then that's the thing about comparison. So there's a quotation that I really like. Comparison is the thief of joy. Comparison is a thief of joy. Because a lot of times when we compare, we're usually the ones who are found wanting and we think we don't live up. And so being aware of our tendency to do that is one step to realize that, you know what, you're being really hard on yourself. And perhaps you're being a little bit unfair in your judgment of yourself. Just because you have a negative thought about yourself, who says that you have to believe it? Because sometimes that is what depression does to us. It fills our head with these negative self-thoughts, and then we internalize them and we think they're true. But I want you to be able to separate out these thoughts about yourself and to recognize that because they come into your head, that doesn't mean that they are true. So everybody, again, with the comparisons, they're never an accurate way because you never have all of the information. The metrics are always insufficient. So somebody else may have good positive attributes, but guess what? You have your own and you don't need to measure up to anybody else. So the other thing is if you do find yourself having so many negative beliefs, you might want to think about whether you might want to get some help to talk to somebody about those. So for that person, I would even outright ask, do you think you're depressed? So you don't have to be at the extent of the continuum where you're thinking of hurting yourself, but do you think that you have so many negative beliefs about yourself and how other people think about you that maybe you want to get some help to talk about that?
Actually, if I could just add to that, I think that we're talking a lot about core beliefs about self and the future and others and so on. And I think we know that, you know, depression actually impacts the way we think and what we believe. So we often think depression is like when you feel sad and tearful all the time, but it can affect your appetite, it can affect your sleep, all of those things, but it also affects the way you think. So even your ability to concentrate and remember stuff, but also the types of thoughts that you have and how much you go over and over the more negative and worst case scenario thoughts as well. And you know how I was saying before that a lot of people are actually depressed but don't recognize it because they just think life is crap, I'm crap, and no wonder people don't respond to me, so I might as well just keep them far away. And that's a strategy. But the more you keep them far away is actually maybe the lonely you feel. And then when they stay far away, it only reinforces what you thought you believed before, that you were completely unlikable. But sometimes our strategies both help us and hurt us. And that's why I think it's really important to talk to somebody that's a bit neutral to see how depression might be actually shaping up some of those ideas. So yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Danielle, I don't want to cut you off, but somebody sent me a question, so I'd just like to ask you on answering. They said, if your friend has been raped multiple times and want to commit suicide, how do I direct her as a friend?
So assuming they're not a UE student, I guess there are a lot of, you want to look at places where she can access support, right? So for example, there's a domestic violence hotline. If she didn't even want to see anyone face to face yet, and just think about it, you can actually call, it's anonymous, it's 24/7, just to kind of start that conversation. The Rape Crisis Society also has a hotline. I don't think it's toll free, but again, they would be able to understand about the history of sexual assault and things like that. There's Families in Action in the community. If she can afford, private therapy, most people are doing virtual sessions now. So you don't even need to leave your home if you find someone who's doing therapy over Zoom. So I think the key thing is actually to just lock into some services that she feels open for. So I'm hoping I've given a range of ones, whether it's telephone, whether it's community service, or whether it's private therapists. Obviously, TTAP, which is the Trinidad and Tobago Association of Psychologists, they're online, and you go there and find a therapist in your area if you're looking for private services as well. Does that answer that question, I hope?
Yeah, I think it does. I know we have a lot of questions and we've gone a little over time, so I'll just ask a few more that I think weren't covered because some of the questions were similar. So my family and peers all tell me that I'm lazy and an motivated person. I keep explaining and telling them that I'm mentally not okay. Them not understanding, and they all have negative comments towards me, only making me feel worse. How can I make them understand?
That's a tall order. I think what I'm hearing a lot of is just having very little understanding of mental health issues. And so it sounds like the person has some valid concerns there, and it's affecting their ability to function and be motivated and interact. And maybe some families about tough love, and maybe some family are just ignorant of what mental health can look like. So again, we talked a little bit earlier about being in a hostile society, a hostile space, and really trying to reach out, whether it's to friends or other family that might be a bit more of an ally, might be a bit more understanding, or might even support that person accessing some help, actually to address some of the issues if they don't already have that kind of support. But I think it's important to keep reminding yourself that you know what's holding you back, and that you are not, in fact, lazy, dysfunctional, and just trying to be difficult. Because when we are faced with all that negative feedback, you have to stay focused on what you know is the truth. You know, we talked about we have an idea doesn't make it true. Repeated feedback isn't a fact, all right? So we talked about resilience. Dr. Khan mentioned that as something about very important in terms of your mental health. Resilience is sometimes about having a thick skin when other people are giving you a lot of negative feedback because they don't understand.
Thank you. What to do if I need to talk to someone because I'm having bad thoughts and I have no friends to talk to and it's really late at night?
Again, I would say that there are a lot of hotlines available. I mean, there's Childline, and yeah, it's not just for children. I mean, like, you know, I think it goes up to 25, except if they ask and they say you're 26, they're not going to hang up on you, right? So I guess what I'm saying is things like Childline, there's Lifeline, there's Domestic Violence Hotline, Families in Action has a hotline. So there are a lot of things out there that are potentially free if it's just a voice that you need to talk to at 3:30 in the morning and you don't really feel like you have anybody to call. I think that it may also be important in the waking hours to see what can I put in place for myself, whether it's about maybe trying to make an appointment to see somebody at one of these places. Again, I know that private therapy can be a very expensive option, but there are places like Hill and Families in Action, and there's another one I'm thinking of, but I'm having a mental gap here. I can't think of the name. But there are some limited places that are a little bit more reduced fees. If anybody is working, it's important to check to see if your organization or company has an employee assistance program where you might be entitled to some sessions for free. And obviously, if you're a student anywhere, again, most universities, colleges, and schools has some access to that kind of support. So again, try to exhaust all your options.
Sorry, thank you. So just
if I may, I'm going to add some resources that people can utilize. The domestic violence hotline, the Childline hotline, and the Lifeline TT numbers. I'm going to add them to the chat, right? So you all could utilize them as necessary.
Also, we posted a lot of resources throughout this week on our Instagram page, so you can go there to access them as well. Okay, so just 2 more questions. Why do people still think about suicide sometimes, even though they know they won't do it?
I'm going to grab that. I think that's it's a relatively easy question in the sense that, remember what I said before, suicide is not always about death. Suicide doesn't even have anything to do with unhappiness or mental health necessarily. Sometimes suicide or death represents something else, whether it's about an escape. So very often people almost associate feeling overwhelmed, feeling stressed, and they immediately go to that place where, hey, if I was dead, I wouldn't have to deal with this. And that can actually become a comfort. Like when you're feeling overwhelmed, you know that you have a plan. Not that you'd necessarily kind of act on it, but you always have this idea in your head, well, if I was dead, I wouldn't have to deal with this. So it might sound odd to people, but I assure you that for some of us, actually thinking about death and suicide actually becomes a kind of comforting thing and a way that we cope in the face of stress. So even when things are going well, yeah, that thought can pop into your mind sometimes because it can be slightly habitual, what you used to think about a lot in the past. And sometimes we also have odd thoughts. So I'm gonna take front and say sometimes I have some very inappropriate thoughts and they just pop into my head. And then I think, Sarah, oh my God, why are you thinking that? And then my brain would go, yeah, but it's true, right? Or it could be. And it's almost like I'm slightly torturing myself because I'm slightly anxious because it's not very appropriate. So sometimes thoughts are arbitrary and odd, and sometimes they just symbolize something. It's not necessarily about wanting to be dead. So I hope that that's kind of address that.
I think it did. So one last question that I'll direct to Peshmati, and then Dr. Key and Dr. Khan could add to it maybe. In terms of group sessions, do they exist even preceding COVID? Group sessions.
Okay. You mean like one counselor or many counselors to a counselee, or like a few counselors and a few counselees together? With respect to that question, right now we have not had group counseling, but we are actually considering it. It's a new thing that we were thinking about implementing. We were just thinking about it. We didn't plan it as yet, but if we were gonna pitch it to our club, and if they seemed interested or willing, we were gonna go ahead and email our director, who is Dr. Nyonki, and ask her about planning, adding that as part of our services, group counseling. I think it's a good way to. It helps. Group counseling helps, like with AA, I've heard, and with a lot of other issues, like around people who have similar or different experiences, but who can share their experiences, and they would feel less alone. And I will, if given that the question was posed, someone would definitely prefer that. So we'll take it in consideration from now on, and so thank you for asking that question. And that's it.
Yeah, I love groups. Love them. I think one of the issues about mental health is that thing that we talk about as shame and stigma, and we don't talk about it because we think we're the only one and nobody would understand. And the wonderful thing about groups is when you hear from other people, not just your therapist, because sometimes people say, oh, well, you're paid to tell me that. And then I make a joke and say, I work at UE. I'm not paid much to tell you that. But the truth is hearing it from other people where it can really resonate and you can identify with each other is more powerful than most things, right? So in answer to that question, we have limited capacity for groups. It's true because certainly at UE, we do a lot of individual counseling, which seems to be, I guess, people's preferences. But for example, we have Safe Space, which runs every semester, but that's a particular type of group. That's about LGBTQ concerns. So whether you're part of the community or an ally of the community, everybody's welcome. But that really focuses on sex and sexuality and gender and relationships and everything else that goes with it. So that's a particular type of group, I guess, in terms of topic. But what we're trying to do, especially now that we're all virtual, is at the counseling service at the St. Augustine campus, we're starting these open mental health forums, Mind Matters. And it's not necessarily a fixed group, but we hope to kind of introduce some kind of topic about well-being or mental health for like 15, 20 minutes, and then really just have an open space for people to either post questions, bring concerns. And I guess my hope is that if people feel they can drop in and raise an issue, maybe people like it and they might come regularly, and it might, what do I want to say? Blah. That they will meet other people in the group, people can share their ideas, and it might actually become more of a peer support option as well. So it's not a formal group, and it's certainly not a therapy group, but we are trying to create a space where people can come together to actually discuss things about wellness.
And if I may just add a little bit there, so to speak generally about the public health landscape, so there are very few options for group therapy or for support groups. And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. And one of them is the cultural acceptance of it. So a lot of people have concerns about privacy and confidentiality. And so they may shy away from wanting to join a group, especially if it's about a mental health issue. So there are some NGOs and groups that do have support groups, so cancer, Alzheimer's disease, etc. But these are not very frequent and very common. Ironically, group therapy is one of the more cost-effective ways. I spoke about limited resources, so it is one of the effective ways where we could reach more people. And then, as Dr. Chinyanki mentioned, there's so many benefits where you get to hear from others about how they're coping. You can crowdsource some of your solutions. You can be a source of support for others as well. So it really is a fantastic intervention that hopefully, as mental health evolves in the Trinidad and Tobago landscape, we see more options like this. So it's great to hear that through Mind Matters, you're going to be having these fora for people, because what we've found is that anytime we have mental health fora like these, webinars, public symposia, public fora, people want to talk, they want to express, and they want to share. So hopefully that translates now into where we could see as the years go by, we do have more group support options.
Okay, that's the end of the questions. Thank you all. I think you did a really great job of answering. I hope everyone who asked questions had more clarification. And I'll pass you on now to Johannes, who would give you some resources.
All right, guys. So here are the resources. I encourage everyone to take a screenshot, or you can go on the Rotaract Club of Mt.Hope's Instagram page, where we will also have the following information available. So if you or a loved one are struggling with negative thoughts, you can reach out and speak to someone via Lifeline, which is a 24-hour hotline. Their telephone number is 645-2800. They also have a toll-free hotline, which is 800-5588. Their Facebook is Lifeline TT. You can also reach out to Alive, which is a suicide hotline. Their telephone number is 688-8525. Or you can call 650-5270. You can reach out to Childline. Their number is 800-4321, extension 131. If you're a UE student, you can contact the Student Counseling and Psychological Services at their telephone number 662-2002, extension 82491.
I'm so sorry to cut across you. I just want to kind of put it out there that because of the campus being restricted, we're kind of rostering. We have one admin staff that goes in 2 days a week. So I've also put the email in the chat as well, because that's something that is accessed Monday through Friday. So what I would hate is if someone called the number, left a voicemail, and then, you know, waited for days, right? So I think the easiest way of contacting the counseling service at UE would be via the email. So you could just check the chat for that one. Thanks.
All right, so you can contact CAPS via email at the email counselor@sta.ue.edu. That's counselor@sta.ue.edu. you can also reach out to the UEPCA, which is the UE Peer Counseling Association. Their email is uepca@gmail.com. If there's an emergency, you can reach out to the St. Anne's Psychiatric Unit. Their telephone number is 624-1151 or 624-1155 or extension 5. You can reach out to the NCRHA or the Eric Williams Medical Sciences Complex. The telephone number is 645-3232, extension 2542, or the San Fernando General Hospital at their telephone number 652-3581, extension 322. The Trinidad and Tobago Association of Psychologists would like you to know that they are still here for you during COVID-19. So if you or someone you care about are burdened with persistent and overwhelming emotions like sadness, anxiety, or depression, please call their members on the following line during stated hours to talk to someone. The Crisis Intervention Team of the Trinidad and Tobago Association of Psychologists is available to help you cope. Call us from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. via 787-0975. You can call Sally at 730-7639, Michelle at 469-9983, Karen at 731-2386, Deborah at 757-9348, Marion at 485-7382, Marisha at 266-5751, and from 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. you can call Raymond at 732-2702, Margaret at 342-1578, Jefferson at 689-1243, Stacy at 718-4387, Lucia at 784-6678, Karin at 1-702-528-1276 for Trinidadian callers in the US only. So the Trinidad and Tobago Association of Psychologists are here for you during the pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Johannes. So now we'd like to get a photo with everyone that's here tonight. So I'm asking that you all kindly turn on your cameras just for a quick picture so we could remember Project Hope for the year 2020.
Johannes, you'll have to stop sharing for a bit. Okay, smile everyone, cheese. Okay, I'll take another one. More people are coming on. 1 second. Cheese. And one last one. One second. 1 minute, 1 minute. Okay. And cheese. Okay, great. Thanks, people.
Okay, now I'd just like to invite Anne-Marie again.
Good evening again, everyone. I just wanted to conclude in terms of our background of Project Hope. I know we spoke a lot about how Project Hope came into existence, but there was one important person that was very integral to the foundation of Project Hope, and that is Dr. Chinyanki. So I would just like to acknowledge her tonight and truly, truly thank her for all her time and support and effort. I met Dr. Chinyanki 3 years ago, and she was this amazing person who just left this indelible mark in me. I knew one time that we would be able to do an amazing project together. And we have over the past 3 years, she has supported us. Despite her busy schedule, she has always been there to give us advice and to guide us. And I just truly want to thank her and tell her how much we truly appreciate it, how grateful we are for her support to make Project Hope what it is today.
You're very welcome. I'm very pleased to be part of it, and I just encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. You're doing an excellent job. So.
Okay, thanks, Anne-Marie. Now I'd like to invite our Secretary, Kia, to give the vote of thanks.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. I want to begin by thanking tonight's speakers and panelists, Dr. Khadija Khan, Dr. Chinyanki, and Vashmita Ramlokan, for not only tonight, but for all their contributions they would have made throughout this week. A special thanks to Shiris Lachman, Kashe Hannah, the Student Psychology Association, Armani Phillips of the SFES, Yoshida Oli, and the Peer Council Association, and Anne-Marie Menghong, for your creative and testimonial pieces. They have enlightened and touched many hearts throughout this week. Thank you to Professor Hutchinson for addressing the issues of mental health, the importance of maintaining good mental health, and for most relevantly, the pandemic effect it has. We extend our heartfelt appreciation. This executive would also like to take the time to acknowledge and thank the executive members of 2018 for seeing the need for this project. For without you, this project would not have existed. Thank you to the AG, Mr. Jalim Ramnarayan, and our parent Rotary President, Ms. Kimberly Howan, Secretary Mr. Brent Pedro, and the other executive and Rotary Club members for their attendance here tonight, as well as our DRR, Kevon Sanbritrice, our ADRR and Class Secretary Nikisha Satnarayan, and our UE Guild executives for being here. A notable thanks to all the other clubs that shared our content throughout this week, for you have aided us in widening the reach of this project and allowed us to impact many more persons and lives. And for that, we are eternally grateful for your participation. And tonight, as it draws to an end, I want to thank everyone who joined us here for this closing ceremony. Without each one of you here, this year's rendition of Project Hope wouldn't have been possible. And I want to thank you for joining us as we commemorate this year's World Suicide Prevention Day. It was indeed a pleasure to have all of you here tonight, and I wish you all a pleasant good evening. Thank you.
Just to add to that, I'd like to commend everyone who is still here, who was able to maintain our audience. I think we still have more or less the same amount of people that we had when we started. So thank you all for staying. And thank you to our presenters for making it interesting enough for them to stay. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night. Thanks for coming. Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.
Good night, everyone. Thanks for participating.